Welcome to the Credit Union Sales and Marketing Podcast. Your hosts, Bill McKenna, Paul Robert, and special guests discuss ideas for creating alignment in your sales and marketing efforts and ways to accelerate growth. Now let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Credit Union Sales and Marketing Podcast. I'm Paul Robert from FI Strategies. Bill McKenna, say hello. How are you, buddy?
Hello, I'm doing well, Paul. Great to see you this morning, as always.
The McKenna Marketing Network, my co-partner on the podcast here. And today we've got a special guest, so people don't have to hear us talking, Bill, all the time. We get to hear from somebody who actually knows what he's talking about. Scott Florini from Newground. Scott, how you doing, my friend?
Good morning. Really good, guys. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And before we get into the meat of this, give us an introduction of Newground and of Scott. Brag about your company a little bit, Scott.
Well, Newground is a 111-year-old company specializing in planning, designing, building branded spaces for credit unions. I've been doing it for an awful long time. I've been doing it for an awful long time. I've been working with credit unions since the 1990s, primarily market research, feasibility work, strategizing, expansion, how to grow, how to position yourselves better geographically. So that's my specialty. And I'm Senior Vice President of Newground, so I lead the team that does that.
Yeah, you got to throw out that title, right? I mean, it's more than just on a business card. You got to throw it around, right?
I got to it.
Hey, Bill, we've talked a lot about in previous podcasts how a focus on sales and marketing is really about growth, right? At the end of the day, it's about growth. And I think that's what, Scott and Newground bring to the table is helping us grow. How do we go to that next level? It's an important piece of the puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And actually, every conversation we have with clients, Paul, and Scott, and you, they're always talking about growth, right? How can we grow? How can we get more members? How can we deepen our relationships? And one of the things we hear a lot is a lot of the growth in this industry right now, when we talk about credit unions, is coming from indirect lending. Indirect lending is driving a lot of new members in the door. But we know it's not just indirect lending we need more, and we need depth of relationship as well. So I think the branch environment, what we're going to talk about, expansion, new opportunities, it isn't just like sticking a flag in the ground and say, we're going to a new market. It's going to work out great. Let's just spend a couple $1 million or $5 million and do a new market. That's a dream if you think that's going to just happen. So Scott, that's what we'd like to talk about today specifically is like, what is that process when you start talking to a credit union about branch expansion? What do you start talking about? What are some of the things that are hot on your list when you get into those kinds of discussions?
Well, it's interesting. The branch is still the primary vehicle for growth, for member growth, new accounts, new relationships. We have that conversation quite a lot. And you mentioned indirect lending. We work with a lot of clients that have a lot of members in distant areas, but they don't have a branch there, so they have trouble growing deposits and growing accounts within those indirect relationships. So what we do is we bring to bear a lot of pertinent information to justify a location and to measure the business potential in a particular area. Is it worth the resource investment? What sort of reasonable expectations can we expect?
And that's really a science, isn't it, Scott? I mean, to Bill's point, it used to be, where could we get cheap ground and, on a main intersection. But I know I've heard you talk in the past. Sometimes the main intersection isn't the best place for you to be, but there really is a science to picking that spot, isn't there?
Other industries do this. I mean, you see this with restaurants, with grocery stores, gas stations now, car washes. They're appealing to a particular segment. And to your point, sometimes the highest traffic count or the busiest intersection isn't the most convenient for members and most accessible. And so that has to be taken into account as well. And it's important to understand how markets function as well as just the data that's there. I mean, you can follow population, you can follow traffic and all of that. But, understanding how people get from home to school to work, what's convenient, what's not, sometimes side of the road matters. So all of those things are part of the science, as you say.
Yeah. The science is fascinating to me because I think when you first get in discussions with many of the credit union clients I talk with, they go like, oh, we need a new branch over here because we have a lot of new members over there coming, or this is a new growing community over by us over here to, and we have some members and we looked at our members and there's this percentage of them in this area. But it sounds to me like I am certainly not an expert in that science, but the science is something I'm very interested in learning more about. So maybe, Scott, you could dig in a little bit more about the science of a branch. You mentioned a couple things. So what is the process that you use when you go about finding out the best place to put a branch?
Well, you are looking initially for a base of members. So there is, it is fairly common to have pockets of members in communities where you don't have a branch, don't have an ATM or ITM. So you start with potentially those pockets, understand the demographic characteristics, the market segments, the competitors. Certainly the competitive environment is very important, both from a bank and credit union standpoint. And then how the area functions, from a traffic and transportation standpoint. Is it a commuting market or is it a place where people work and shop? So all of those things get studied concurrently, and then you're basically building a picture of what that market looks like and what the business potential is.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess it has a lot to do also with the credit union's field of membership, because certainly we know that there's a lot of community chartered credit unions. As a matter of fact, that's one thing I've seen over the years that is interesting to me, is because, obviously we still work with a lot of clients that are seg-based and multi-common bond, and they're very successful at that. Doesn't mean they don't need more branches, but one of the things I've seen over the years is people think, hey, we'll go community and we'll just start putting branches all over and that's going to work. And we've seen that can be a complete failure if it's not done correctly. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to understand the target. And if you're still a seg-based credit union or, trade industry profession or something like that, there are ways to isolate that information to understand, is there enough potential in a given place to justify physical presence? And then, of course, you're relying on internal information as well. I mean, we talk to clients a lot about their member surveys, arbitrary comments they get from members about, hey, have you thought of a branch over here in St. Peter's or something like that? And if they start getting that time after time after time at the annual meetings and so on, it might be something to investigate.
Everybody wants a branch at the end of their driveway, right, Scott?
That's right.
Especially board members. Hey, once you've identified the general area, and now we're starting to talk about putting a physical presence there, what's that process like, Scott? I mean, as far as, okay, it's going to be a branch, but how big and what does it look like and all of that? Walk us through that, if you would, please.
Yeah, there's a little strategic conversation that needs to happen there. What sort of services is the branch going to house? That speaks to the staff. The size of the staff speaks to the size of the branch. Branches in general are getting smaller. They used to be heavy transaction centers, and now they're more sophisticated sales and service centers where they're doing a lot more consult than they are transactions. As a consequence, the environments are different. They're a lot more contemporary, maybe a little more zoomy. There's a technical term for you, zoomy. A lot of glass, very attractive environments, particularly for millennials and young families and so on. So understanding what the particular need is and what the purpose of the location is critical to understanding placement and size and the rest.
That it can really change your image, can it, Scott?
Absolutely.
It can solidify an image, but it can also really change an image. I was sharing with Bill before you jumped on here about one of your clients out on the West Coast where they went from a branch that was a traditional old style to something that was on the end of a strip center with floor-to-ceiling windows and bright lights, and it was just like, oh my gosh, what happened to that stodgy old credit union that we used to know? It was a completely new image. So it does make a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It gives you a real opportunity to remake yourself a little bit, project the brand in a slightly different way, or maybe substantially different way. The stately location has a place, has a role, but more often, you're seeing a lot different types of environments being designed, and you're right. You're absolutely right. It does change your image.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned early on in this podcast we talked about was the branch, what the branch looks like today. And I always tell a lot of my clients, the branch now, and certainly the branch of the future, is more consultative than transactional. We know for a fact transactions continue to decrease, but yet the importance of that person that wants to go in and have a conversation about something they're not comfortable with. That could be even an account opening. As much as an online account opening has increased dramatically, there's still a lot of people very uncomfortable with it. They don't do it all the time. They want to talk to somebody. Or certainly advisory services. One of my partners in my network happens to be Ameriprise, and we're working with them, opening a lot of programs for credit unions. And the truth is, when it comes to talking about financial services, investment, wealth management, people want to talk to somebody. They want to sit down with them. A lot of times they can do Zoom. But so what I'm leading to, and this is where Paul's expertise really comes in well, I want to talk about how you guys have discussed this. This also has a lot to do with the employees, because the employees are no longer just tellers, but we want them to be more consultative. And I think those employees, when they're in organizations that help them to do that and grow as an employee, it also provides them with a better long-term opportunity, because we know that tellers come and go. It's not a long-term career. So Paul and Scott, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because I know you guys talk about this all the time. You can't just get the new Ferrari, jump in and drive it. You have to really know what you're doing. And I think that new branch sort of is the new Ferrari in many cases. Thoughts, comments, snide remarks?
Well, I'll make a quick comment, and then Scott, you take it. But, it's not just a plug and play. You can't just take the same people and plug them into this new environment. And Scott, that's the word that I know you use a lot, and rightly so, because it is a different environment. And so we need different skill set. We need different behaviors. We even need different attitudes about it, right? So you really need to focus on the people and how are they going to perform within this new environment. Talk about that, Scott.
Yeah, and this is a place where we can learn a little bit from the retail world. Walk into the Nike store on Michigan Avenue there in Chicago, or the Starbucks roastery, or Buc-ee's in Texas. Those people have unique skills, and so it's not just the traditional transaction anymore. They need to be able to communicate the brand, the core values. They need to project a particular image of the credit union, and understand too that they're teachers as well as just resources.
Here's just a quick shout out to our sponsor, ironistic.com. Hey, in today's world, everyone knows the importance of having a great website and having an integrated digital marketing plan. If your credit union, community bank, or any other company is looking for that help, I can highly recommend ironistic.com. Check them out.
Even something, Scott, and this gets back to the environment idea of having an open floor space. And not being behind a teller line, not being behind a desk, being out in the open, if you will, and then approaching members as they come in the door instead of the other way around, members approaching you. That's part of the environmental design that you guys work through with clients. Can you shed a little bit of light on that and what goes into those decisions?
It helps build relationships. More than anything else, and it earns trust, and it's a little bit more open, and you're still maintaining a certain level of privacy there.
Right.
That's one of the things that the teller line did, was that there's this barrier, there's enough distance between people coming up there, so you never want to project anything other than that the conversation you're having is private and confidential. But yeah, very similar to, say, a Marriott. When they check you in, a lot of times they'll walk out from behind their service desk, say, "Here's your key. Thank you very much. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you." It's more of a welcoming approach, and I think based on everything that we've heard from our clients that have done that, it has been hugely successful, and they've grown accounts per member, they feel, because of that environment.
Yeah.
One more thing, Bill, and then I'll give it back to you.
Yeah.
Scott, you talked about the privacy, and I know that's an integral part of the design, the fabric that you use in your branches, different materials that you use, all in the spirit of, maybe tamping down the sound and the volume and so forth. That's all critical in an appropriate design and build to produce that type of environment, isn't it?
It's so interesting, and I'm not from the technical side of our business, right? I'm not the architect or the interior designer, but I'm fascinated to hear them talk about the different materials like that you just described, the acoustical materials, the glass that's being used now. It's just so incredibly efficient to accomplishing your goal. Whether that's privacy or maybe just adding a little spirit to the area.
Yes.
All of those things are available to us, and it's just a multitude of choices that you have now.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, you guys still got me stuck what you said a minute ago. I heard you talk about Marriott coming out talking to you. When I go to Motel 6, nobody ever comes out and talks to me. So I guess I got to start thinking about my travel plans differently. Yeah. So
Oh, that could be a new training opportunity for you there.
yeah, it sounds like it. Anyway, getting back to the new branch, one of the things that we're obviously been tasked to do many times with the new branch is create a grand opening celebration, create the marketing plan, the strategy for how we're going to get people to come to that branch. How we're going to get some people that maybe were going to other branches go to that one because it's more convenient for them. So that gets into some really good segmentation. One of the beauties of what you're talking about is prior to doing this big investment or making this big investment, the research that you do is going to be critical because you're going to understand how to market, how to grow that branch, and how to create the ROI to justify the expense of that branch over the next so many years, right? So that's something obviously you talk a lot about with the credit unions as well. And I know sometimes you might let go of it at a certain point there, once they actually have it open. But the point is that the marketing after that branch is open is absolutely critical to justifying the expense.
Yeah, and the early stages of the facility are very important as well. You see a tremendous amount of growth. There's a big bump in the first 2 to 3 years. That's usually when you get a sense of, okay, we're gonna make it to 50 million, or we're gonna make it to 75 million. Those first few years and months are critical, and Paul, you alluded to it before in terms of the culture and the training and getting the right personnel and the right staff. Very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
One chance to do it right, don't you? You got one
That's
chance.
right.
Yep. Hey, Scott, talk about how the brand alignment is critical in all of this. Can a credit union just put up a branch and keep the same brand, or is it always tied to some kind of brand alignment? And is that an overhaul or is that a refresh? How does that all factor into what we're talking about here?
Well, we talk about the branch space as the physical manifestation of your brand. So it's just a tremendous opportunity to communicate with members in a new way. Yeah. So things like environmental graphics, we're creating a lot of history walls right now. Credit unions are really embracing their history as part of their brand. So in many ways, it's if you're transitioning your brand, maybe not changing it, maybe not changing your name or changing your colors or anything like that, but just maybe sending a new brand message. It's really the ideal time to do that when you're opening a new building, because the building can reflect various elements of the brand. It just gives you this tremendous opportunity to communicate it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't miss the opportunity.
I think sometimes we're too shy about that, don't you, Scott? We don't talk enough about our history and what we're doing in the community and for the community and so forth. And I thought of that because the history wall is an opportunity to do that. It's maybe to toot our horn a little bit, which I think we're a little too modest and we don't do enough.
And I think it's super powerful stuff, actually, because as you create differentiation and what makes you different than your competitors, it's funny. I'm working with a client right now, and I'm not going to tell you who they are because it's confidential. But I was looking into their history. And it's fascinating because when I looked at their logo and their history, this one's quite unique. Sure. The history is one of the things that we can absolutely play up as part of the marketing. And I think that's so cool when you can actually do that. And I can tell you story after story of credit unions we've worked with, name changes and bringing out that new brand and that culture. I think that this brand refresh, a story I always use about this whole brand refresh or a new branch or a new design is like if you've lived in a neighborhood for most of your life or for a long time and you drive down the street and all of a sudden someone resides their house or they get new landscaping or they do this and all of a sudden you go like, whoa, like that's a major change. It gets your attention. One of the things I love about these brand refreshes and brand redos, whether that's an existing branch that's freshened up or if that's a whole new brand design and a new branch you put in a new market, it gets attention. It stands out. And I think that's it. It's huge because people are going, something's changing. What is it? And it's visually, the visual brand is just one part of a brand, but the visual brand is very powerful.
Absolutely, and your facilities, your ITMs, ATMs as well, they're brand beacons. They're projecting that brand day and night. And you're absolutely right about the history wall. People love that stuff. I'm fascinated by it as well. And these credit unions have been part of their communities now for some of them coming on 100 years. So, they've helped build those communities, lending money, helping small business now. I mean, there's just a tremendous sort of a feel-good story about history and then illustrating that, projecting it, making that part of your environment.
And being able to talk about it, being able to, spotlight certain things and speak proudly of that history, I think is oftentimes overlooked.
One last thing I'd like to touch on here is getting people to make the move to do this. Because I work with so many credit unions that have just said, oh, it's going to be expensive. We don't have the money to do it. And yet they're sitting on 13 and 14, 15% capital. It has to do with the investment in the future, right? They say we don't have the money. Okay, maybe this year you didn't earn a lot of money. I can't deny that. It's been a challenging couple of years. But the truth is, you need to invest in the future. And if you really want to grow, you have to make the investments into people and branches and technology. As a seminar I do called Obstacles to Growth, and a couple of them have to do with those exact things. So, Scott, what is it you would say to a credit union who's going, well, we need to, but it's a lot of money. How do you overcome that?
Well, you still need to invest in the future. And so, there's several ways you can do that, but when you reach a market share point where there's really just not much more left in a particular market, you've done a pretty good job of capturing members and accounts in a particular place. Doing the right research, understanding where the opportunity, there may be very low risk opportunities just around the corner. So it's worth doing some research and understanding what those opportunities are.
Yeah.
It's not always risky. It's not always expensive. It can be a very logical thing, a very logical type of way to grow and expand.
Agreed. Yeah.
Hey, Scott, let's start to wrap this up and bring it to the finish line here. That what you just described there, what's the first step? I mean, if you're talking to a credit union that is, like Bill described, a little hesitant or very hesitant as the case may be. But even if it's somebody that's saying, we know we want to do this and we need to do this, but never done it before. And we've got a new team and so forth, or a new board that's maybe a little skeptical or unsure, et cetera, et cetera. what are the first steps or two that you would advise them to take, and what would be your role in that as you move forward?
Well, there's just so much information available to us right now, and the tools have gotten better. The tools that I work with have gotten better through the years. So, I would say take the time to plan, understand the business potential, the challenges, the hurdles, and develop a business plan for that. Isolate the target. It was drilled into me back in school, 30 years ago now. Target market. What's your target market? Plan for your target market. So, every market's a little different. In my world, boilerplate is a negative word, and so, take the time, understand the information that's available, and then that helps you tremendously in making decisions.
Yeah, and we can't just guess at these things. This isn't something we can just say, yeah, this should be a good area, and then again, choosing a firm like Newground, obviously, people could just look at your portfolio of work. It's beautiful stuff. You guys do great work. And, there's going to be people that look at local contractors and people that are local architects. And, they're going to go, well, it might cost us too much to do it somewhere else. But Paul, you mentioned a minute ago, you only get one opportunity to do it right. And if you're going to make a difference, Newground brings to the table the experience, the expertise, and again, just look at the portfolio of work. It's absolutely beautiful. So I commend you guys. You guys really do great stuff, Scott.
Well, thank you. And I should mention also that, local knowledge is very important. So we do rely on clients. It's not just us communicating what we think the future holds in a particular place. We want to understand what they've been successful with, what's gotten them to this point, and then how they can replicate that in the future.
I like the reference to boilerplate is a negative word because back to where we started, there is a science to this. And so I think that's another reason to tap into that science, Scott, and make the best use of that information and data that's out there to make the right decision the first time. So
one of the advantages of doing this all over the country is that, you see a lot of success stories in what works. And what works in Nashville doesn't always work in Key West, right? So, and the facilities don't look the same either. So, you're right. There is no real boilerplate to this. Every market's a little different, and you have to approach it that way.
Hey, hearing you talk about those different places makes me want to ask, Scott, what's the most glamorous spot you've been to recently? Because you go to some garden places, man. Let me tell you.
You know what? I was telling my wife the other day, I don't have a favorite anymore. I love traveling the country. I love seeing the different parts of the country, how it's all a little different, how the different industries drive different towns. I'm spending a lot of time right now in the Midwest, which is where I'm from. But, you're learning about all these different places and just gaining so much knowledge. And so I have to say, though, in the middle of winter here, I like the South.
Me too. I just came back from a trip down there, and I look at now every day. I look at my weather app, and I'm looking at the temperature here. I'm looking at the temperature in the cities I just left, and I'm going, there's something to be said for that.
Exactly. Right.
So good.
All right. Well, Bill, let's bring this to a close. Good conversation, great conversation, Scott, as always. Thank you so much for making the time and sharing your expertise. We will we'll have a link to Newground on our web page so people can contact you and or they can find you, I'm sure, on their own. So thank you so much, and good job wearing the logo shirt there. We can always use those golf shirts, right?
Show the flag a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much, Scott. It was great to meet you today.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right. Take care. Talk again soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.